Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I bid you all a very warm welcome to this open seminar where we're actually focusing on the case of Catalonia. The title for this seminar today is New Emerging Small States in Europe, the case of Catalonia. I'm very happy to see you all here today. We're actually doing this in collaboration with Diplocat, and we're live video streaming this, and I'm hoping that there might even be some people in Catalonia watching this right now, and hopefully somewhere else in Iceland as well, for those who couldn't be here. My name is Pia Hansson. I'm director of the Institute of International Affairs and Center for Small State Studies here at the University of Iceland. I'll just lead you very shortly through what it is that we'll be doing here today. We have two opening statements. The first one by Raúl Romeva, who is Vice President of Group The Greens, European Free Alliance of the European Parliament. His talk is titled Catalonia Self-Determination Process Within the EU, a Bottom-Up Movement. Then we have an intervention from an Icelandic academic, Valur Ingimundarson, who is a professor of contemporary history here at the University of Iceland. And his speech is entitled Contested Sovereignty and New States, Political Divorce Proceedings in the 21st Century. Following those two interventions, we will be having a panel discussion, at the beginning of which we will have the possibility of hearing from a few of our guests that have arrived here today. Not only are we welcoming Raúl Romeva, we're also welcoming Antoni Abad-Ninet. I hope I said that fairly correctly, who is a professor of comparative constitutional law and works at the University of Copenhagen. Also joining the panel will be Baldur Þórhallsson, who is professor of political science and Chamonix Chair of European Studies at the University of Iceland, and Guðmundur Hálfdanarson, professor of history at also the University of Iceland. So we should have a very interesting afternoon. And I'm so very happy to actually be participating in such a collaborative effort such as this one. I've been in touch with Elizabeth. Where is she? There you are. So this has been a very fruitful and really fun collaboration. And I hope that you will all enjoy the seminar that we have set up for you here today. But before we proceed to the first two interventions, I'd like to welcome to the podium here Albert Royo, who is Secretary General of Public Diplomacy Council of Catalonia, or Diplocat as we call it. So please join me here, Albert.
Thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here. Also thank you to those of you who are following us via streaming. I will start by saying thanks, of course, to Pia Hansson, Director of the Institute of International Affairs Center for Small State Studies. I would also like to thank Xavier Rodriguez, who put us in contact with the university, and also to all the experts who come from Catalonia or Denmark, as Mr. Abad-Ninet, or those experts living here in Iceland. Let me start by explaining a little bit what Diplocat is. Diplocat, the Public Diplomacy Council of Catalonia, is a public-private partnership whose main goal is to strengthen the relationship between Catalonia and the rest of the world. And in this partnership, we count on the government of Catalonia, the Barcelona City Council, and the main city councils in Catalonia, all the Catalan universities, chambers of commerce, employers' associations, trade unions, and even FC Barcelona is a member of these institutions. And again, the main goal is to explain Catalonia abroad, to try to work on a strengthening of the relationship between the civil society and the institutions of Catalonia and those of the rest of the world. And of course, why not? Right now, the first question we are put is, what's up with Catalonia? What is happening there? And it's in this sense that we are organizing this series of conferences. We've been in several countries in Europe, and now it's the turn of Iceland. Just for your information, there seems to be in Catalonia an ongoing self-determination process. Since 2010, since the ruling of the Constitutional Court annulling some of the most relevant aspects of the Catalan Institute of Autonomy, which was in force since the year 2006, there's been a big increase of those supporting independence. According to the most recent polls, There are between 55 to 60% of Catalans supporting independence, between 25 and 30 against independence, and around 20% who don't know or would abstain. But of course, the only way to know it is through a ballot box. And here comes the most relevant figure, which is that 80% of Catalans want to hold a vote. It means that not only those supporting independence, but many who would like to vote against are asking for a proper legal vote on the future of Catalonia. That's the reason why the Catalan Parliament, with the support of 75% of the Catalan Parliament, are trying to convince the government of Spain to let Catalans vote in a proper and legal vote. We've been trying all the legal avenues since reforming the Spanish constitution so as to let Catalans vote, till the temporary transfer of powers from Madrid to Barcelona so as to hold a proper referendum. They have been all refused by the Spanish government. So we have ended up with what will take place on November the 9th, which is a non-binding popular consultation on the future of Catalonia. The date and the question was agreed among all the political parties of Catalonia, or those who are in favor of the vote, which are 6 out of 8 political parties represented in the Parliament of Catalonia. And they agreed in a twofold question to be put to the Catalan citizens, which is, should Catalonia be a state? And if the answer is yes, should this state be an independent state? Well, we already know that if this popular consultation on November the 9th, in 3 weeks' time, is blocked, as all the other legal avenues that we've been trying hard, or ignored, the outcome of this consultation ignored by the Spanish government, we may end up in a kind of plebiscitary election, which could be a regional snap election, which could take place in the coming weeks or in the coming months, and which may be considered as a kind of proxy vote on independence, with those parties supporting independence on one side and those against in the other. But in the end, Catalans will vote, and this is what is the most relevant, and from that vote we may obtain a democratic mandate, which could be for independence, which is something we don't know right now. As I said, this conference is framed in the series of conferences that we've been organizing since 1 year ago. We've been in UK, we've been in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in Norway, in Portugal, also in other parts of Spain, and now here we are in Iceland, which is a country which obtained its independence in 1944. So we have, some experience from which we can learn. And of course, Iceland is very well known for its commitment to peace and democracy. And that's something that we share with you. An independent Catalonia would, of course, have a robust stance in favor of democracy and peace in Europe and in the world. So I'm finishing right now. We count on some of the best experts coming up from Barcelona and from other parts of Europe or from Iceland. Thank you so much for being here with us, and once again, thank you to Pia. Thanks.
And now we proceed to our first speaker, Raúl Romeva. He's a graduate in economics, doctorate in international relations from Autonomous University in Barcelona. He has quite extensive experience, has been a member of the European Parliament since 2004, worked with the Initiative per Catalunya Verds, part of the European Greens, and sits on the European Parliament's Committee on Foreign Affairs and its Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. So please join me in welcoming Raúl Romeva.
Thank you so much. Let me just prepare exactly. That's a bit. I can manage that still. Right. Even like this. No, don't worry, because it goes like it. It's just from the beginning because, well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you also for attending that conference and for be willing to listen what is going on right now in Catalonia, which is something that to me is very linked to something that is happening in Iceland very recently, which has to do with democracy, basically. That's what makes us excited about what is happening right now down there, and what makes us absolutely, let's say, positive in order to share this with some other colleagues, friends, and Democrats around the world in order to find what are the common points that we can get there. After being 10 years working in the European Parliament, I've seen in many ways a lot of different reactions to what is happening right now in Catalonia, which is normal, because it's quite a recent, the dimension of what's happening right now is quite recent. But in order to understand why this is happening, it's important to know where we come from. So in that sense, I always do the exercise of trying to make the following. Imagine that you are an alien living in Venus, and you are kind of, let's say, enthusiastic of the planets, and you're studying a specific, very curious planet called Earth, and with your telescope, you fix your objective in the planet, and then suddenly you got a picture. These things happen sometime. Then you land, or you focus on Barcelona. That's the year 2012. And you see these type of pictures, a concentration of people asking something. So the main question there is what's going on there. Well, obviously something is going on, but you don't know what. And then you use your interplanetarian Google Translator and try to go to the main Spanish newspaper, because you know that this is geographically part of Spain, so the logic thing to do is to go to the Spanish newspaper, try to read and to understand what is going on there, simply for curiosity, nothing else than this. Then you read, I insist, thanks to the Google Translator, the interplanetary Google Translator, and you learn that, in Catalonia there is a kind of strange movement, that the president has become mad because he has lost his mind, and the people is following, in a non-comprehensive way, this president who is becoming crazy somehow, and the people is simply demonstrating. It's normal that the people is angry, because you read in the newspaper that there is something called a kind of economical crisis, and the people is frustrated, is upset. It's normal. So somehow the perception is that, this might be something like a hit, is a temporary situation, that, you shouldn't be worried, amidst at least very, very worried. Then, you simply leave this in your desk. Then you move to another, this should move, to another reality. And 1 year later, you remember that you discovered this situation in Catalonia. And there, I repeat, 1 year later, September 11, 2013, and you with your telescope discover this. This is a line of people holding their hands all around 400 kilometers. That's the borderline of Catalonia altogether. If you count individually all these persons, you will get more than 2 million people holding their hands, following the line, as you can see in the map. I'm not going to show it all. I insist there are 400 kilometers. But just to make you an idea of how difficult could be, or it is, technically speaking, to organize this. That's September 11th, 2013. I repeat, you are an alien. You are trying to understand what's going on. You are simply saying these kind of pictures. You are simply perceiving that something is happening in a small part of a country called Spain, which is part of a huge reality which is called European Union. We are not still in the middle of the struggle. We could be following. Proceeding to 1 year later. That's September 11th, 2014. That's some weeks ago. And then you see another type of concentration of people. All this is people wearing shirts. Some are wearing yellow shirts, some are wearing red shirts. Just to give you an idea of what this movement is, they are simply not even walking. They're staying, forming what we call a V. You see the line? It's simply a letter, is a V following the streets, that it could be very understandable, read as the V of voting. As simple as this. But I insist, that's a short approach to see how the situation is in a short picture. Well, definitely you as an alien, you recognize that something is happening there. If you recall what you read from the Spanish newspapers, you start to feel that maybe this explanation of that president became crazy is not that accurate. Could any president organize this in a normal democracy in the European Union today? Very unlikely. Very unlikely. The only way this is possible to happen is when is a bottom-up movement. And that's what explains all these amounts of mobilization. That's the first point. The second answer that you would probably get is that why, if I am an observer, I didn't realize that this could happen before. This is the question that many of the European Union governments, the European Union institutions, and some other colleagues, they are asking right now. What has happened in the last years in order, well, that this would not be foreseen before? What has happened that we have not been, let's say, aware of in order that this suddenly appears to our eyes as a surprise? That's a phone that is not mine, anyway. And that's where you, as an alien that is interested in knowing what is going on, you start not only asking what is the Spanish newspaper saying, but going to Catalonia and asking the local people there, why are you doing this? That's the right question that sometimes needs to be done. And to me, I'm trying always to answer this. Imagine that I have the alien in my desk, and he's asking me, what's going on there? Why this is happening? Why the people is demonstrating? Why the people at all levels, all ages, all status, all political ideologies are... It's not me. I mean, that's... Anyway, it's off. So. And that's what I always trying to explain. To me, there are 6 points that are crucial. One, you have in the papers that they have been distributed among you, a bit of short historical, let's say, events that explain a bit how did we get there. We could have a long story explaining a lot of facts, but let me just remind a couple of dates or three. Maybe one that is very important. 300 years ago, 1714, is where Catalan was a sovereign reality by then. And then there was a war because the Catalan joined the request from the Habsburg dynasty to recover the Spanish, let's say, king throne. And then, well, it was a defeat. After the siege of Barcelona, in the hands of the Bourbonic dynasty, you probably heard about Philip V. And in that sense, that was the first moment where, let's say, all this, in terms of, let's say, the building of a nation started to be a new reality. I'm saying this because there is a claim right now to recover that. And that's something that makes the Catalan case singular one, a specific one. Obviously, some people might say, well, but this has happened 300 years ago, so what's the point now to take it back? I mean, it's too long away. Fine, could be fair. It's a fair question. Then you move, I'm moving a bit far if you want, but then you find the 40 years of Francoism after the Civil War in 36, 40 years of Francoism, the different attempts from the Francoism, the fascism regime who tried to eliminate not only the language but the reality of the Catalonian, let's say, sovereignty in all levels. And this obviously provoked a lot of consequences in terms of not only legal frame but also in terms of let's say, of the recognition of some basic cultural, linguistic, institutional aspects. And then after this period, you kind of recover some normality. At the end of the 70s, you have the transition period that was supposed to be, let's say, a bridge between the Francoism and the new democracy that was being started up, but it failed somehow in some very crucial aspects. And then you came to the current reality, to the current moment, to the 80s. Well, before the current one or the present moment, you have the 80s with a lot of attempts of finding a new way to establish a new frame in Spain in order to accommodate Catalonia in that new reality. But then you finally got the last 5 years. And that's what I will stop mainly. Because you have to distinguish in between the history in long periods or the recent history. To me, what it makes the Catalan case absolutely singular in that moment is what has happened in the last 5-10 years. Is what explains why 5 years ago, if an alien put the telescope watching at Catalonia, it would be highly difficult to find that amount of people in the streets, and now you have every year more than 1 million, 1.5 million, even 2 million demonstrating in the streets. What has happened? Well, what has happened, you have a bit of a summary in your papers, which I will not focus on because I think it's very well explained there. But roughly speaking, the perception is very simple. There is a moment in 2004 where, according to all this history, a new elected government, socialist government, makes a promise that is very well taken by the Catalan, generally speaking, community, party, society, whatever, is the possibility of reviewing the state, Spanish state, in order to include, in order to reform from a federalistic point of view, what is basically a centralistic state. There is some hope coming out from these promises. And there is a lot of expectation and a lot of work of a lot of actors, both in Catalonia and from different political families, to move towards that direction. Fine. The problem is that the concretion of this movement is called what we say the Statute of Catalonia. It's a kind of constitution, which has no technical level of constitution of a state because Catalonia is not a state, but is kind of the basic law of what so far is the reality of Catalonia, which is regional. This was a very hopeful moment for a lot of people in Catalonia because that made a lot of people think that the current situation in that moment, the status quo, could evolve to a more decentralized state, to a recovering of some competencies in terms of powers and in terms of recognition, for instance, of the concept of nation or the concept of language, and without naturally moving towards the creation of an independent state with all the, let's say, headaches that this could provoke. And the huge amount of population probably in that moment was very, very expecting that this would work in the right way. The problem is that when this statute, with this text that after a long list of discussions were submitted to a vote in the Catalan parliament, it was majority accepted, but then it was sent to the Spanish Congress, which is the Spanish parliament. And there, it was somehow cut down. It was slided. It was reviewed by the majorities there, created by the Partido Popular, the Popular Party, and the Socialist Party. And some of the crucial aspects that were, let's say, accepted and motivated in the text, in the original text, were simply, let's say, in some cases nuanced, in some cases even deleted. That created a lot of frustration. But still, the people in Catalonia is pragmatic. the text came back to Catalonia, it was submitted to a referendum. The people voted majority, with some reluctances, but the people majority voted yes to that text. And at the end, we got something that was not what we expected, but at least was something that was majority accepted, not unanimously, but majority accepted in Catalonia. But then, it happens that the Partido Popular, which is right now the current ruler of the government in Spain, thought that this was not enough. They took the text and they brought it to the Constitutional Court. That was in 2005. The court spent 4 years discussion about the text, and finally in 2010, they decided that some crucial parts of this text needed to be simply deleted. One of them, for instance, something that is very sensitive, if you can imagine, the fact that recognizes Catalonia as a nation, which was not even part of the text itself, but of the preamble. Well, that's where the people, and I must say that probably is the huge majority of the people who is demonstrating on the streets right now, the pictures you saw before, is in that moment when they say, enough is enough. We have been very pragmatic. We have tried to do everything that we could in order to find a place within this so-called plurinational state, which is Spain, in order to fit ourselves in a slightly comfortable way. But there are some limits that we simply cannot live with. And one is when you deny something that is constitutionally recognized as well, which is the plurinational dimension of the state. So the contradictions there is that technically Spain is a plurinational and plurilinguistic state, which means that is a state, is a reality which is formed by different nations and different languages. The truth is that when you go to the point, the current rulers of this state, and I'm not only mentioning here the Partido Popular, but also the other biggest party right now, which is the Socialist Party, they are simply denying that reality by saying, no, that's not really true. That's an interpretation of reality. Because in reality, there is one Spain, and different languages, well, it's fine that we have them only if they remain silent and kept to their local populations, but not for the public use, and obviously not in the international level. Fine. And then on the other side as well is recognizing that this is a plurinational state, but mean that also institutionally we have to adapt the institutions to that reality which is plural. That we are not going to do at all. Since then, the reaction of the civil society, and I insist, the civil society, not the political parties, the civil society which says enough, is to organize themselves and to mobilize the people, sometimes even against the political parties, just to say, well, this is something that we cannot accept, thus we ask to vote. We claim that we simply want to put a ballot in a box and simply decide ourselves what is going to be our future. Let's solve this conflict by democracy. That's what people said in 2010 when we had the first demonstration, in 2012, 2013, 2014. There we get the current reality or problem or situation or status right now. By years, we've been asking simply to be asked. We've been asking that in a legal way, as it has happened in Scotland, they allow us to say, what do you want to be? And to act accordingly to the result of this let's say, question or ballot or democracy exercise. That's the situation we are living right now. The future, as you probably will see in the text, well, in front of you, that is included in your folders, is that not even a non-binding consultation has been allowed by the government. We wanted to do what Scotland has done. That was not possible because in the other side we didn't have a Cameron, we had the Rajoy that has nothing to do with Cameron in terms of democracy. That's one thing. Then we tried the second step. Let's do something different. Let's try to make a non-binding consultation, which is legally something that can be done according to the Catalan laws and according to the international community principles. Not even that is possible, because one reading of the Constitution and one reading of the laws makes this now be blocked by the Constitutional Court again. Now we are in another step, which is kind of make, let's make a kind of a poll, a survey, on what the people in Catalonia would like to be. We're just expecting what is going to happen with this new option that we have on the table, which is going to be, let's say, well, let's see what's happening anyway in the 9th November, in the next November the 9th. This is simply to say, in a very short way, yes, there is an economical crisis, but this is not only the explanation that can give all the keys to understand what is going on. It's basically a question of sovereignty. It's basically a question of who is deciding what, and that's what we call simply democracy. And finally, just to make a long story short, the outcome of all this process, that, to be honest, my feeling is that it's going to happen someday, and surely, this is going to happen. We are going to vote. And the result is going to be perceived as clear in any way. Is going to be the starting point of a new situation that we expect, and that's what we're working on, a win-win-win situation. Definitely it's going to be a win situation for Catalonia, because finally probably it will clarify the status of Catalonia in this complex world that we're living in. Secondly, we expect that this is going to be also a win situation for Spain, even if sometimes some mainstream there don't even realize this. But the fact that we can cooperate with Spain, even within the European Union or at the international level or in an equal-to-equal relationship, makes that we can focus on the real problems, on the real difficulties, and find final solutions to the real problems we have to face with. And finally, and that's my last point, there is also a win at the European and international level. Why? I know that the question that has to do with the self-determination is always a very complex one. Historically, it has been always linked to violence, to blood, to wars. Why not trying to set up a precedent that makes this be solved by a democracy procedure? Why not try to find a solution, a mechanism, a way to solve these kind of tensions that exist in many parts of the planet, that shows that it's possible to deal that type of problems in a democratic way. That's why I mean that there is also a win perception of this at the European and international level. If we succeed to do this in a democratic way as we want to do it, well, this could be seen as an example for other realities in the world to say, this is possible. Let's try to face it that way. That's what I expect is going to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this, Raul. This brought the issue very much to the forefront. We now have an intervention by Valur Ingimundarson, followed by a panel discussion that Alison Bales will be chairing. So when you're done talking, I'll actually leave it to you, Alison, to take over. But Valur has an intervention called Contested Sovereignty in New States, Political Divorce Proceedings in the 21st Century. So please join me in welcoming Valur to the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to do here is to approach the matter of secession from a comparative perspective and focus on several new or recent cases and the geopolitical and legal aspects. I will focus mostly on attempts to confer legitimacy to the political divorce proceedings, which in many cases are contested, the question of state viability or the nature of the new state, or the limitation imposed on the exercise of sovereignty, while important, are not my concern here. It is widely accepted that self-determination, as defined in international law and on which any claim for secession is contingent, is based on nationality or ethnicity, common culture, history, language, and territory. Such a claim, however, does not have to be fulfilled through sovereign rights. The more common way is to grant minorities autonomy rights. Yet this tension between self-determination and state sovereignty in international law is, of course, what makes secession attempts so contentious and difficult to achieve. A successful political breakaway is dependent on a combination of internal and international factors. First, secession and subsequent state formation need some sort of legitimization within the political group or nationality in question. Second, while not being a condition for separation, the process is much easier to manage if it's accepted either explicitly or implicitly by the majority population. This does not, however, prevent new states from being created as a result of breakup of empires, multi-ethnic or national states or nation states, and sometimes states are deprived of their territories as a result of geopolitical interest, government repression, or lost wars. Third, the enterprise is contingent in the long run on the recognition by other states, which are normally reluctant to grant it unless there is a broad consensus on the process of secession and state creation. To fulfill the first requirement, to receive a popular mandate for secession, the principle of a referendum has become the most common form. As was the case during the process of post-World War II decolonization, this makes perfect sense when an overwhelming majority of the population favors secession. The practice gets, however, more complicated when the population is evenly split. The recent referendum in Scotland is a case in point. A simple majority decided on an existential questions of historical proportions on independence. Even if the outcome was more decisive than expected, with 55% rejecting secession, there is obviously a difference in terms of legitimacy when 90% of the population vote for a split or 51%. When Quebec held a referendum on independence from Canada in 1995, secession was defeated by a margin of 1 percentage point. If it had gone the other way, it would have meant that half the population had not wanted to be part of the divorce proceedings. Catalonia could possibly be faced with the same problem if a sizable number of people would balk at separation due to the risk involved and the uncertainty of state building. This is not to say, however, that there is a fair way of claiming legitimacy for secession. Thresholds designed to require enhanced majorities can be as hard to justify. The question is more about achieving political stability and societal reconciliation following a process which can sharply divide the electorate. What explained the momentum for holding a referendum in Scotland in the first place was not only national identity aspirations, but the widespread attitude that the Scottish views and interests were not adequately represented by British institutions. That is precisely what we see in Catalonia at the present. Many believe that the Spanish state has treated it unfairly economically and refused to recognize its national identity claims. In the case of Montenegro's separation from Serbia, the EU insisted on an enhanced majority to validate the referendum result. At least 55% of the population had to vote for secession. The EU was against the breakup of the Union of Serbia and Montenegro, but the numerical requirement for enhanced majority was totally arbitrary and reflected the economic and political leverage the EU had vis-à-vis Montenegro, a weak state with EU membership aspiration, than any concerns for establishing a fair universal principle. As it happened, 55.5% of those who took part in the Montenegrin referendum backed independence. But one can certainly understand why the Montenegrin Prime Minister, Đukanović, who spearheaded the secession effort, declared before the referendum that he would push ahead if only a simple majority voted for independence. In contrast, the Kosovo Albanians, which constitute over 90% of the population in Kosovo, were not allowed to hold a referendum before declaring independence in 2008, with the support of most Western states, with the exception of Spain and several other countries fearful of secession movements within their own borders. Actually, the Albanians had already held such a referendum in 1991 after Kosovo had been illegally deprived of its autonomy by the Serbian regime. It was, however, not recognized by any state in the 1990s. The Kosovo Albanians had good grounds for secession after the breakup of Yugoslavia. After having enjoyed most of the same rights as those of other republics, they had been exposed to serious state-sponsored repression based on ethnicity. As a nation, the Kosovo Albanians were far greater in numbers than the Montenegrins and would have had a strong popular mandate for self-determination and secession. If a referendum had been held in 2008, it would have, without doubt, have produced a resounding vote in favor of independence. But as a result of Serbia's opposition, the international community feared that it would destabilize the territory, which was still recovering from the wars in the former Yugoslavia. A referendum on the creation of South Sudan, however, was held in 2011 with UN and great power backing. It resulted in 98% of the population voting in favor of secession. Another precedent for such a decisive outcome was when the people of East Timor voted for independence from Indonesia in 1999, with 80% support in a referendum organized under the auspices of the UN after negotiations involving Indonesia and Portugal, the former colonial power. The recent Crimean referendum on secession from Ukraine surely reflected the will of the majority of the population, but since its terms were dictated under the barrel of a gun, it had far more to do with the wish of and interests of an external power, Russia, intent on using the political vacuum to change borders. In other words, while the practice of holding a referendum to legitimize secession is the favored one, it is not a universal rule. This process often depends on geopolitical factors such as diktats or conditions imposed by great powers or supranational organizations. Historically, the second requirement for secession, the acceptance by the majority population, is usually far harder to fulfill. Territorial losses are generally seen as a threat to state sovereignty, and if achieved as a result of violent conflict or great power decisions, they can lead to future irritantism. Needless to say, if multinational states recognize the right of political divorce, no matter how reluctantly, the process is far more likely to lead to a mutually agreeable outcome. What explains why the Scottish referendum went so smoothly is that all sides accepted the rules of the game, even if the Scots were subjected to pressure and threats by the British government and also by the EU. It also underscores why the Montenegrin secession was achieved without trouble. Serbia recognized Montenegro's right to do so as a former Yugoslav republic, even if it was against the move. When Kosovo followed, however, in the footsteps of Montenegro, Serbia vehemently opposed, offering instead the option of keeping Kosovo as a UN protectorate for the additional 20 years or autonomy within Serbia. For historical reasons and because Kosovo did not have secession rights within the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, the Serbs refused to accept Kosovo's independence. Therefore, it had to be imposed through a declaration underwritten by the Western powers. Its sovereignty is therefore still contested, even if it has been accepted de facto by most states. The Catalan secession movement faces similar challenges, the absolute refusal of the Spanish states to accept on legal grounds the legitimacy of the secession. It is hard to believe, or possible secession, it is hard to believe that the Spanish government will seek to prevent the referendum through violent means, risking a civil conflict. But what makes the situation potentially explosive, unlike the Scottish case, is that there is no consensus on the rules of the game. The Spanish government is obviously convinced that the strong language contained in the Spanish constitution on territorial integrity will give it strong legal means to resist and ultimately abort any Catalan secession attempts, even in the case of a positive vote in a referendum on independence. The idea which is often put forward when secession movements push for a referendum is that the majority population should have a say in the matter through full participation. The British government flirted at least indirectly with that argument before agreeing to a Scotland-only referendum. If such a rule would be established, however, it would guarantee the status quo and ensure an outcome suitable to the dominant national majority. Hence, it's not a credible option when strong cases are being made for secession. The third condition for a successful political divorce depends on international recognition. If the separation is achieved with mutual consent, the path towards state recognition is usually quick and easy. The recent examples of East Timor, Montenegro, and South Sudan are cases in point. If Scotland would have opted for independence, it would have been likely that external recognition would have been achieved without much trouble. When secession is contested, however, it has proved far more difficult. Since the great powers could not agree on Kosovo's final status, the refusal of Russia and China and other countries to recognize its independence has meant that it has not been granted admission to many international bodies, including the United Nations. To be sure, 110 states have recognized Kosovo. In addition, the ruling by the International Court of Justice that Kosovo's declaration of independence did not violate international law has boosted its long-term chances of recognition, even if it did not necessarily confer legitimacy on the state of Kosovo. The independence of Abkhazia and Southern Ossetia, which was initiated by Russia after the 2008 Georgian War, has only been recognized by a handful of states, and the Crimean secession and subsequent annexation by Russia has not been recognized internationally and has, in fact, already been turned into a frozen conflict. What complicates the picture is the role of supranational organizations like the EU. Interestingly enough, what separatist projects in Scotland, Catalonia, Kosovo, Montenegro have in common is that they are only directed at the nation state, but not the supranational entity, which is set to limit their sovereign state aspirations. All independence movements were adamant on either joining or staying in the EU as sovereign states. The only potential exception is autonomous Greenland, that is if it opts for secession from the Danish realm, as it is entitled to. At the same time, the EU is wary of secession schemes on the grounds that it can breed regional instability and make its own governance even more unwieldy if additional states would be admitted to it. The EU's threats to exclude Scotland and Catalonia if they went their separate ways was not a productive way to deal with the situation. This is not to minimize the problems of political precedent setting, legal issues, or the more tendentious grounds of enlargement fatigue. But it would clearly be in the interest of the EU to influence the policies of new national entities and potential states which fulfill its criteria and have abided by them through continued membership. The alternative could be regional volatility, which the EU wants to avoid at all costs. A more difficult problem is posed by individual EU states, which do not accept secession and want to prevent the breakaway state from EU membership. If Spain would take its hard line on independence to the EU, it could pose a serious problem for an independent Catalonia. What is more, it could enlist this in support of other EU states facing potential secessionist attempts, like Romania, because of Transnistria, Slovakia because of the Hungarian minority, and Cyprus because of its own divided status. Historically, self-determination efforts usually have more chance after wars and conflicts than in time of relative political stability. The peace settlement after World War I, which was heavily influenced by Wilsonian idealism on the question of rights of self-determination, led to many new independent states. And the Second World War created a decisive momentum for decolonization. Between 1945 and 1960, 36 new states were created in Africa and Asia, and after the end of the Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union and the violent disintegration of the former Yugoslavia resulted in numerous state formations. Secession aspirations can often be legitimate, even if they do not have the consent of the majority populations. Yet the chance of success depends in most cases on specific political circumstances. State-sanctioned repression can strengthen the case for secession and a moral claim on statehood. It is, however, not guaranteed that the two go hand in hand. It needs no explanation why a mutually agreeable political divorce is the most stable option. It reflects the normalization of the relationship between the contesting parties. The breakup of Czechoslovakia and the two independent states at the end of the Cold War was an example of such a successful outcome. The same applies to Montenegro and East Timor. The civil conflict in South Sudan has undermined its viability as a state, although it has not affected its international legal sovereignty. Other options involve imposed solution, often by great powers with varying degrees of legitimacy. In the case of Catalonia, active Spanish resistance could not only impact the process of international recognition, but hamper state building in the case of a yes vote in a referendum. The Scottish case showed that even if a sizable minority wanted full separation from Britain, there was no real tension or a state of exception between Scotland and the rest of Britain. The fact arguably worked against secession. The economic crisis in Spain is a major source of Catalan grievance against the Spanish states, but it's not about a real civil conflict. This could eventually affect popular backing for such a move, as was the case in the Quebec referendum. As I have stressed here, power and geopolitics, wars, breakup of empires, or state repression often have more to do with secession outcomes than legal precedents. Norms which have assumed the function of international law are also open to critical scrutiny. For example, after the break of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, the principle of sovereignty was conferred on the republics and legitimized through international recognition of the successor states. But this created many problems in case of other territories with national or mixed population. What is more, the constitutional right of secession did not mean that the republics were allowed to break away in Soviet and Yugoslav times. If this right was in fact meaningless and inoperable when made part of the law, why should it suddenly become a sacrosanct rule for secession in international law after these multi-ethnic states ceased to exist? Again, this has more to do with arbitrary political norms adopted by great powers to promote political stabilization or to prevent divorce proceedings to start in the first place. For the same reason, it lacked credibility to argue as the United States that Kosovo's independence was a special case, or sui generis, as if other nationalities who have experienced state repression and violence could not have the right of secession. Again, this only highlights the point that despite the privileged status of the nation-state in the international system, it is often forced to cede sovereign rights, as is the case with EU membership or as a result of great power interests. For this reason, there is no likelihood that a rule which is universally applicable for secession can be agreed on. Apart from state sovereignty rights, other factors always have to be taken into account, such as self-determination rights, historical claims, the nature of armed conflicts, the interests of great powers or supranational alliances, government practices within states, and the relationship between majority and minority populations. And while the success of state creation ultimately depends on international recognition, it is not a requirement for establishing a functioning state. History shows that it took decades for some states to get full international legitimacy. The regime governing the most populous state in the world, China, was not granted the right to represent it at the UN until 22 years after it came to power. Conversely, the state of Palestine, based on the 1988 Independence Declaration, is recognized by 134 UN members, but has not had a chance to function as a state because of the Israeli occupation. Yet before any political divorce proceedings can be initiated, the question of contested sovereignty needs to be engaged, to what extent it should be unified, shared, or divided. And the outcome of that power struggle is heavily contingent on the relationship between the contesting parties within states, and no less important, the level of interference by external actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Waldo, for that excellent survey. I would ask you and Raoul to join the panel together with our three additional speakers, if you could just arrange yourselves along the table here. And my understanding is that during the panel, Raoul and Valor are here to take comments and questions on their keynote speeches, which you've just heard. The other members of the panel who are speaking for the first time will make some short statements, and we will then have a collective discussion where you can make your own comments. You can throw any questions at any member of the panel. I'm, as you heard, Alison Bales. I'm an adjunct professor at this university. I was speaking here just about a month ago at two events that we held on the Scottish. Valor has drawn attention to some parallels between the Scottish and Catalan cases, and also one very obvious and problematic difference, which is the attitude in the capital of the country. Just another little thing I would like to point out is that Catalonia and Scotland are both relatively small in population compared to the country in which they're set at the moment. And if they did break away and achieve independence, they would become small states after the experience of living in a large state. And that is the relevance of the presence on the panel, particularly of Professor Baldur Thorhallsson, because he will be making some remarks about the issues for relatively small states, states under 10 million in population, if they manage to achieve independence. Really, the only other point I need to raise now about the relationship with Scotland and Catalonia is that I've been asking myself what conclusions have people in Catalonia drawn from the outcome of the Scottish referendum. It was a relatively clear rejection of independence, 55% against 45%. At the same time, you can say that 45%, nearly half, voting for independence is pretty significant. Why was it as high as 55%? Again, many people would refer to the way that the campaign was waged by London. And even if Madrid would agree to a referendum in Catalonia, you would still have the question of what promises would it make and what threats would it use to try to affect the outcome of a referendum. This continues to be a very lively and contentious question in Britain. For example, London did promise some additional powers to Scotland if the Scots would be nice and agree to remain in the Union. But now there is a great deal of uncertainty and dispute over whether those new powers will or should actually be granted. And that is one of the things that's quite likely, I think, to keep the independence idea alive in Scotland, because it has created confusion and I think quite a bit of distrust almost on the day after the successful vote for a continuing union. If I ask myself the question the other way round, what could Scotland learn from Catalonia in the position where it now finds itself, that for a while at least it will be a continuing part of the United Kingdom? I think our event today and the papers that you had picked up today are one possible very interesting answer, because we can see from this organisation, Diplocat, the Public Diplomacy Council of Catalonia, that while not being a sovereign state, Catalonia is engaging in a very effective form of what the academics now call para-diplomacy. It's like the diplomacy of a state carried out by a non-sovereign state, but making use of the most modern means of information and of the activism of citizens around the world. Every country has a Catalonian house, a group of its citizens living here, which, of course, Iceland does as well. I was very interested to learn that recently, and to learn that individuals, social organizations, and businesses interested in Catalonia can all take part in a public-private partnership to teach more about it and to build up relations and dialogue. Scotland's para-diplomacy is at the moment, I would argue, rather modest by comparison. And one of the things that Edinburgh does need to think about now is whether Scotland can tell its story better abroad through organisations and events of this sort, but also in numerous other ways, which Scottish officials and academics are indeed studying at the moment. So there is still interesting and important work to do in Scotland. If I may quote the title of an article I wrote around the time, there is life after no in Scotland, and possibly also on the international front. So if you'll excuse those rather biased comments, because I think it's no secret which way I voted in the Scottish referendum, I would now like to turn to our panel and first ask for a statement by Anthony Abbat-Inenet, who, as you heard, is a professor currently working at the University of Copenhagen. I see that you found the nearest microphone, so please, you now have the floor.
Is working? Yes. Well, I think you have enough voice. You can listen. There's problems. Now? Yes? Okay, first of all, I want to thank you, the Diplocat, and also the Institute of International Affairs and Center for Small State Studies of the University of Iceland for the invitation. I mean, I'm really, really glad to be here as a citizen of Catalonia, because it's a way to, at least from my perspective, to serve my country, which is Catalonia. So thank you very much. I mean, I've been thinking about what to tell you today, and my 10 minutes was thought to be dealing with Icelandic audience. Yeah. So I think that you know, in some extent, it's easy things, clear, evident things. In some cases, are more difficult to explain than difficult things. I mean, we have this card in our set which says it's simple, it's democracy, because it's so. But then we need to explain what is going on again, yeah? First of all, I want to apologize that in the map, in the reverse, there is not the map of Iceland, so I apologize because of that. I'm not the one who made it, but in Iceland I feel as that we need to apologize that there is no the island here, yeah? So, as I'm saying, sometimes easy things are more complicated to explain. In a country like Iceland, where it's the home of the modern understanding of constitutional crowdsourcing, that in 2011 we can read an amazing resolution of the Constitutional Council that it has been exported all around the world, and even that the issue ended a little bit dramatically with a very disputed resolution of the Supreme Court of Iceland. I mean, is an example to show how a country has been understanding constitutionalism and democracy as something that is not possible to contravene. They are not antagonical concepts. I mean, if we read not only the Venice Commission report on the whole constitutional system of Iceland, but also the decisions of the Supreme Court and also the Constitution of Iceland, you'll see that in this country, constitution is understood as something dynamic, as a living document, something that is amended, that is possible to be adapted to the reality that you are facing in everyday life. I mean, you have 7 important amendments of the Constitution since 1944. In my state, in my country, our Constitution is from 1978. First of all, we need to understand that the Constitution of 1978 is very unique because it was a Constitution that ended with the transitional period to a democracy. It is very important to highlight, to remark, that from Catalonia, we have understood this constitution as a starting point, something to develop, something to accommodate, and something to read it as a living document again. But from Madrid, the constitution was understood, and not merely as an ending point, as something that from here, we will not more decentralize the state. From here, that's the maximum, this is the top, this is the end of the understanding of our state. So this is a very, very important and dramatical, a different understanding of what the constitutional text means, but also what the constitutional text, what the meta-legal understanding of the Constitution is. I mean, what we are facing in Catalonia is also affected by this. You said in one of our interventions, a word that we use in our courses of constitutional law, which is reconciliation. Well, in Spain, there was not this sort of reconciliation. In Spain, there was not a real transition to a democracy. Spain is a country with a big democratic deficit. And this is clear because the Catalan process, the Catalan challenge to the constitutional understanding is affecting also the transition as such. Something that the Spanish has been sold all around the world as something to be export, to be proud of. But as I said, it was not a real reconciliation. It was not a real transition. And this democratic challenge to the Spanish Constitution of 1978 is also opening this sort of Pandora box. I wanted to say that in order that you understand what is at stake. It's not only that we are claiming for a democratic consultation to our population, but also it can be understood as a threat to what the Constitution meant, to the transition from a Franquist and fascist regime to democracy. Well, I mean, to be clear, in Catalonia nowadays, there is no only an ancient confrontation between constitution and democracy. I mean, this is not new. Some of these issues were talking 25 centuries ago with the concept of nomophilakes, the guardians of the constitutions, the guardians of law, the demos against the politeia in Ephialtes, Solon, and others, yes, Cleisthenes, Pericles. So, I mean, this is something that is happening, and is going to happen again. Not in a country like this, where judicial review is not of a bill passed by the parliament, is not regulated on the constitution like in Denmark. But it's happening mainly in countries like Spain or Italy, where we have a concentrated control of constitutionality with a unique, valid interpreter of the constitution. So what is happening in Catalonia nowadays is that there is a constitutional court which is clearly politically biased, which is clearly used as a political tool, which is predicted. You can predict in the political issues what is going to be the decisions. So it shows you how predictable and how biased is the court from the very beginning, making an interpretation of the Constitution that is not the only one. This is not the unique one. There are other interpretations of the Spanish Constitution that will allow some consultations. I mean, we have constitutional interpretations that are contradictory by itself. The Spanish main arguments against allowing a democratic challenge, a democratic call from Catalonia, is that the Spanish Constitution states the unity of the state. Yeah? So, and on the other hand, Article 1.1 from the Spanish Constitution says Article 1.1, which is the first article, which is establishing the framework, which is the most important article because it is the first one saying that's where we are. It's defining Spain as a social and democratic. So there is an interpretation to accommodate through the concept of democracy, if we are really talking about democracy, this sort of democratic questions. I mean, the point is, for me, is clear. It's not that we are using that there is a constitution against democracy, but a concrete interpretation of the Spanish Constitution against another interpretation of the Spanish Constitution against some human rights that are ratified in the international treaties like self-determination, which is ratified by the Spanish governments in the different treaties that Spain are part of, but also by the main concept of democracy. So this is what is at stake now. To end, I mean, again, I will answer your questions if you have, so I can go more in detail about these issues. But, it's very, very easy. I'm going to do an analogy to understand it. For us, it's like to play a football match in the Santiago Bernabeu, which Barcelona is playing against Real Madrid, but the referee is not only a Real Madrid player, but is also the one stating which are the rules in each concrete moment. So this is how it is, more or less. This is how you will understand the analogy. Thank you very much.
Well, football is a popular topic in Iceland just now. I think you chose a good metaphor to finish with. And I'll now give the floor to Professor Guðmundur Hálfdánarson, Professor of History in our own university. So this is working, is it? Yeah, good. Well, please go ahead.
Thank you, Alison. It's really a pleasure to be here discussing nationalism and questions of national identities, which are my field of expertise. So if you go back 70 years, to 1944, Icelanders decided in a referendum that they wanted to be totally independent from Denmark. 98% of people voted yes, and almost 98% of the eligible to vote, which means that this was more or less absolute unanimity. It was more or less a Soviet style of election. And what is rather particular in this case, in the Iceland case, is first of all that there was no Danish party in Iceland. There was absolutely no opposition. There was a total agreement on this split. And secondly, which is also interesting, is to note that at the time when Iceland became an independent state, there were 126,000 inhabitants in the country, which raised some questions. And it's interesting that the year after, 1945, the eminent British historian Alfred Coppin published a book on national self-determination. And in one paragraph, he discusses Iceland. And as I say, this is 1945, the year after Iceland became independent. And there he asked a question which he thought was very pertinent. The question was, can Iceland afford to be without economic links with some larger and more prosperous state? And he asked this question because he strongly controverted the assertion that it's not possible to be a nation without being a state. I mean, that was his point of view. From the British point of view, it was you could be a nation without being independent. And then he quoted Edmund Burke, and he clearly thought this was answered the question. If we cry like children for the moon, like children, we must cry on. Clearly saying that Iceland should simply forget it. I mean, it was rather unfortunate that Iceland was already independent when he published the book. So in 1970, he republished the book, a second edition came out. There was no change in his argument. He just took out Iceland. So, but this is an important question. What, the question he was raising, what is a nation? How do we define nations? What nations can be sovereign? And what does sovereignty mean? I mean, these questions, Iceland has been facing these questions for the last 10 years. If you look at Catalonia, I mean, it's clear that Catalonia fulfills all the requirements that you usually place for being a nation. I mean, they have a history of being, if not independent, at least to be a separate crown in the past. They have their language, which is rather defined and accepted. And they do have economic viability with 7.5 million inhabitants and are fairly prosperous. So if we call a nation an imagined community, it's very easy to imagine Catalonia as a nation. But the questions that must be answered in this kind of relationship is how to draw the boundaries between a state. And it's clear that it is not the same anonymity in Catalonia as it was in Iceland in 1944. And there are multiple links with Spain that will be rather difficult to clear up. However, as long as there is a desire to go the separate way, I mean, who is going to say otherwise? However, if you look at Scotland, for example, we have been drawing that comparison, which is rather interesting. Let's say, if, as Valor mentioned, if it would have been 51% yes, I mean, it would have been rather difficult to go into the future of independence. There would be a lot of strife, a lot of internal debates, which we do not face in Iceland because there was this clear anonymity on the issue. One of the things that is very often discussed in this kind of relations is the kind of strange contradiction that people see between the kind of state integration in European Union integration and the kind of fragmentation that we have seen in the last decades, with independent Catalonia would be a part of independent Scotland also. There's this kind of double processes that people see as contradicting each other, but I think they are actually complementary. I mean, there is clearly a complementary relations between European integration and the kind of desire of the smaller micro, whatever we call them, internal nationalities to become more and more independent. Because in the European Union, there is a kind of possibility to become independent and at the same time being a part of a larger configuration. And this is actually, I did in my PhD, I did a comparison of Iceland and Brittany in France. And in the 1920s, there was actually, especially from the left, there were Breton nationalists who saw the European, some kind of European Union as a way of bypassing Paris. So you could be a part of a kind of European Union would be better than be a part of France. So the question is, and this is the question that no one can really deal with except for the people of Catalonia themselves, and that is what kind of configuration Catalonia is going to participate in the future. And if I could whisper in the ears of the Spanish government, I would say, tell them, I mean, it is not very useful to try to stall this development. I mean, in the end, it is the will of the people of Catalonia that will prevail. Because whatever we define, however we define a nation is really a group of people who want to be a nation. I mean, in the end, that is the only definition that you can come up with. You can come up with all kinds of people who come up with all kinds of definitions. In the end, if a group of people is able to convince themselves and convince others that they are a nation, they are a nation. I mean, who are we to deny that? I mean, that's impossible. So I just would say that in the end here that it's really interesting to follow what is going on in Scotland and Catalonia, and I'm sure there will be more cases like this. And I think this is, in many ways, very much a complementary processes to the European integration. I mean, these are not two processes going different ways, they are going together.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing Iceland so fully into the comparison. You mentioned the obvious cases in Europe, but I yesterday was in Flanders, which we should not forget, because the Flemish Parliament has now a majority of the moderate nationalists, the ones who are very difficult to discredit, you know, not the extreme ones. And it's going to be extremely interesting to see how they will use their majority now within Flanders. And we should not forget that a constitutional possibility of independence has also been offered to the Faroes, which is a further example of a possible new state which would not, it would seem, be interested in joining the EU. And then you would have to see what other kind of economic shelter the Faroes might be able to get. I deliberately use the word shelter because I think that's one of the things that Baldur is going to talk to us about, and he will now have the final contribution to this panel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alison. Do you hear me? Yeah. Thanks for very informative lectures and comments. I would like to say a few words about small states in Europe. All of the potential new independent states or entities in Europe can be regarded as small. If we look at both traditional variables defining size of states and when we look at like new variables defining size of states. And here I'm of course talking about number of inhabitants, size of territory and economy and military capacity, the traditional variables used to define size of states. And then the so-called new variables we could look at the size of the public administration, size of the foreign service, and we can look at how states or entities perceive themselves and how others perceive them. And I think this is important, and was important in the case of Scotland and is important in the case of Catalonia, because according to the small state literature, there are inbuilt weaknesses associated with smallness. And I think it's extremely important for entities that are considering to becoming independent and small states or small entities that are already independent to acknowledge weaknesses associated with smallness. Because if you don't acknowledge these weaknesses, you can't overcome them. This was one of the problems I think Iceland faced in the 2008 crash. We didn't really acknowledge the weaknesses associated with our small community. That's why we were so hardly hit. So we didn't make any attempt to overcome these weaknesses. So with what weaknesses are we talking about? We are both talking about, from my point of view, economic problems and political problems. On the political side, of course, it's obvious small entities can't defend themselves. And secondly, they have smaller public administration. They have a small foreign service. And they often need external diplomatic assistance in order to press for their issues internationally. And generally, in the IR literature, it is regarded that small states need favorable norms and values of the international system in order to survive. Basically, one could say that small states survive because of the willingness of larger states to allow them to survive. Then, if you look at political problems, they are associated with the smallness of the domestic market. The small domestic market basically means that the small states rely to a greater extent on import and export. Quite often, small markets only basically export one or two products and basically rely on them in their export. And this makes their economies fluctuate much more than larger economies. So small entities are much more often the first to be hit by international economic crisis. At the same time, they are often the first markets or entities to recover from international crisis because of the flexibility of the domestic decision making. And then what can small states do to overcome these problems? First, from my point of view, there are two things they need to do. First, they have to come up with some kind of domestic arrangements. And they can come up with different domestic arrangements. If I just name one of them, put forward by Peter Katzenstein, the leading scholar in the field of small state studies, he claims that the democratic corporatism developed in a number of European states is some kind of a domestic buffer, which small states have created to overcome economic weaknesses and the fluctuating international economy. So basically, the small European states, basically the Scandinavian states, have adopted domestic corporatism to ease the burden of the free market. But I would like to spend more time on the second point, which is highly important from my point of view, because in addition to these domestic arrangements that small states need to adopt, is external arrangements. And traditionally, it is often said that small states rely on their larger neighbors for survival, as I mentioned before, and small states rely on regional and international organizations. I'm not so sure that the international relations literature basically describes the relationship between small states and larger states correctly. Because we are basically not talking about equal partners when we are speaking about small states on the one hand and larger states on the other. Like Alison mentioned, I would say that small states need shelter. They need economic, political, and societal shelter in order to survive, in order to be prosperous. And they can seek these shelters either from their larger neighbors or regional and international organizations. And these shelters can be in form of military support or diplomatic assistance, if you talk about the political aspect. And if you look at the concept of economic shelter, this can be in the form of access to a common market. Interestingly, both, as has been mentioned, Catalonia and Scotland, as an independent state, want to continue to belong to the common market. A form of an economic shelter could be to take part in a common currency or get direct economic aid, etc. And societal shelter, I would say, regards the importance of transform of norms and values and messages from the core or the international community. And if I allow myself just to mention Iceland in this context, we Icelanders quite often proudly claim that Iceland has always managed on its own and has been independent, at least in the beginning when we created the so-called Commonwealth, and have managed on our own. But from my point of view, I think we have always been sheltered by our larger neighbors. Basically, even through these so-called Commonwealth years, we were sheltered by the Norwegian sea power in the Middle Ages. Then we were sheltered by the English. Then we were sheltered politically and societally by the Danes, though we did not receive economic shelter by the Danes. And as most people are aware of, we were basically sheltered by the US, the superpower, in the post-war period. And we are slowly, from my point of view, moving into the new so-called European shelter, first with membership of EFTA, then membership of the European Economic Area, and membership of Schengen. And now we have a huge debate whether we should be fully integrated, be fully covered by the European nations and the EU within the EU itself. And one of the reasons why we, from my point of view, why we were so badly hit in the 2008 economic crisis was the fact that we were not sheltered. We did not have economic and political cover. The Americans had left us, and we got the message from Brussels, hey, you guys are not members of the club, why should we bail you out? So it's a fundamental importance, so I end on those notes, for all entities that are considering independence to make sure from day one that they have economic, political, and societal shelter.
Thank you very much, Baldur. I must also thank all the speakers for their discipline, which has left us a full half hour for a final dialogue with the audience. I think we'll go straight into that. In the audience, you're most welcome to make a comment or a question. Please try to keep it fairly short, because I think there are many people who will want to do that. And will you please begin each time by saying who you are? So who would like to start? You can put your question to any particular member of the panel, or you can just ask for the panel in general to respond. So maybe we can start here.
Hello. First of all, my name is Oriol Massot. I'm Catalan. I live currently in Iceland. And my main question is, when you come back from Keflavik to Reykjavik, there are some signs about Iceland asking not to be inside Europe. I did vote the European Constitution, I don't remember which year exactly. But and I'm glad I did it, because keeping in mind how democratically is the Spanish government nowadays, maybe right now we would have all the whole army in the Catalan border waiting for that independence proclamation. My question is for Mr. Raúl Romeva, keeping in mind his background. I'd like to know if we do have, at this point, if we do have enough contacts, if we have contacts, and if we need them in Europe, just in case, or some supports for just in case we get further on that self-independence proclamation. Thank you.
Good, that's clear. Would you like to reply right away?
Thank you. Okay, is it working now? Is it on? Right. Actually, the thing there is that the perception we have is that we are in a process. It always depends on how you do things, that you will get more or less support. That's important. This is why it's so important that we get, let's say, the clear picture of what we are doing. It has basically something that has to do with democracy. That's, to me, very, very important. Because the way you explain this and the way you show that this has basically a societal shelter, which means that there is a huge majority of people that wants to go that way, that makes easier or the potential followers or supporters to accept this message. The second thing that to me is very important, I want to insist in something that I personally said and many of us mentioned as well. There is a claim for a vote. Some assume that automatically the outcome of this vote is going to be yes. Well, it depends. It depends. We still don't know. What is absolutely crucial is to have the possibility to express themselves. That's important, because if we compare this to the Scottish case, and if we compare how the European community and the international supporters have followed the Scottish case, it's simple. My perception, according to my background, as you mentioned, is that in both cases, there is an uncomfortable way to approach it. We are a problem. Scottish was a problem. Any situation that, let's say, forces to a change of the status quo in terms of nation state in Europe is a problem. And it's perceived as such by the member states and by the European Union as such. If the Scottish referendum would have been positive as an outcome, I mean, if the yes would have win in that situation, the European Union states and the European Union institutions would have accepted this reluctantly. This I can tell you because I know the internal perception, but they would have accepted this because it was an internal agreement in between Scotland and the UK. I have to admit as well that they were, at least in the beginning, convinced that the no would win. So that made a bit more, let's say, quiet or calm the responses they made. If you, and that's important to me as well, if you look at the last week of the campaign, there is a crucial moment where the London government Cameron changes the tone of the discourse. Instead of threatening, instead of sometimes even insulting, instead of explaining that Scottish would become something, let's say, poor, not protected, economically a difficult reality, they changed it and they started offering things. They started saying, well, maybe we should be a bit more generous. And they recovered the previously abandoned idea of the devolution max. That's what many people have expected to happen in Spain. That's a fact. And this is also part of the problem we're facing now, and this is also a way to approach the potential supports. That's politically speaking. There is another risk. You mentioned a bit the risk of a more, let's say, stronger position, put it that way. Imagine that these moves ahead, and there is somebody in the Spanish government who says, well, we have to take strong actions there. That's why we have the army. Let's use it. Is that plausible to happen? My personal opinion, and it's a personal opinion based on my experience, is that it's possible, but it's not plausible. For two reasons. One, if the Spanish government would do this in a case or in the scenario that we would go ahead with our, let's say, democratic intention of voting, well, they would most probably have to confront with, and that's my feeling and my expectations, they confront the opposition of the other EU member states. The fact of being member of the European Union is in itself a clause, a safeguard clause that prevents the Spanish government to use the force against this. I insist. That's my perception, and that's how I understand the international community and basically the European Union member states would treat it. Never underestimate the Spanish government. I agree. But still, I still believe in the weight of, let's say, democratic legitimacy. The second reason why I think this is not plausible is because this is a step directly to the independence. And my reading of this is that every time that the Spanish government has been opposing to the claim of democratic vote from Catalonia, the number of people who, in that vote, whenever it's going to happen, will vote for yes to the independence is growing. Would this vote be made 2 years ago? Probably the result would be, well, would have been one. It's very difficult to say which one would be. The more difficult this vote is, the more close to independence Catalonia is too. That's my personal reading too. Because I insist on something that is crucial and that's important. When we ask for a vote, we ask for a vote of any kind. People can vote yes, and people can vote no, as it happened in Scotland. Surprisingly, in Scotland, was close to vote yes, and only the change of tone, and only the final or last-minute proposals coming from London made the result change. That's something that we expected the Spanish government to read, and so far it has not been the case. But let's see and wait, and let's keep moving on that direction.
Thank you very much. More from the audience? Yes, please.
Please remember to speak into the microphone. I was just reminded about that.
My name is Thomas Meister. I'm the German ambassador in Iceland. And I would like to thank our guests from Catalonia for their very informative and passionate expose. I mentioned to some of our guests that I used to serve in Madrid a long time ago, until 10 years ago. And at that time, the major domestic policy issue, of course, was the independence of the Basque country. We had the Lendakari, the Plan Ibarretxe, etc. We did not mention the Basque country in this round today. So how would you just describe to us the major parallels and differences on Catalan independence compared to Basque independence plans?
Yes, please. Anthony, you would like to...
Zuerst, ich bedanke mich für eine Frage. He's a German ambassador, so I wanted to show that I speak a little bit German, like Josep Guardiola. So, about the differences, I think Raúl explained it in a little bit in his speech. Ours is a bottom-up, clearly a bottom-up movement. This is the civil society who is pushing our representatives in order to negotiate a democratic solution to give a voice, to have the possibility to vote on the political future of Catalonia. I was advising Lendakari Ibarretxe when you was working in Madrid. I was with him in a meeting when he was thinking about the possibility to do his referendum. The questions, the process was completely different, and his was, in my understanding, an initiative that started from the president to below, not the other way around, which makes a big, big difference in pragmatical and real terms.
Well, very short as well. Maybe because it's important. Every time we explain this to some colleagues, to some friends, to some people in the international community, there is always the proposal of asking us to try to get a common approach with the Spanish government. Why you don't try to get a federal approach of the Spanish state? Why you don't try to negotiate a new status of the Catalan language in the international community? Why you don't try to do this? Why you don't try to do that? The difference, and that's important, is that if you have a reading of not only the history, but specifically the last 10 years history, is that all this has been tried. All this has been put on the table, has been proposed, has been suggested, has been voted. And nothing of this has been positively taken by the Spanish government, nothing. Which means that at the end, and that's a perception, 10 years ago, you could have roughly 1/3 of the population who was in favor of the status quo, 1/3 of the population who was in favor of trying to move from that status quo to a more federal state, which would mean gaining a bit more of powers for Catalonia, defining a bit differently the status, but within the state reality, and 1/3 of the population that was directly in favor of the independence of Catalonia becoming a state. That was 10 years ago. After all this that has happened these last 10 years, mostly the last 5 years, specifically talking about 2010 with the sentence of the Constitutional Court, Well, the reality shows that all this amount of people who was in the center, pro-federalist, had to move. The reality has demonstrated that this reality was not on the table. The Spanish government never put this on the table, so there was not possible to negotiate anything. So either I go back and stay happy with the status quo, which is not the case, or I simply move. Well, the only solution, the only way to move ahead is to ask for independence. So all these one-third that was in the middle is just moving. That's what makes the majority of people demonstration in the streets. And that's important because that shows that the request right now is not anything that you can simply link with a nationalistic feeling. If you ask the people whether they feel themselves or they consider themselves to be nationalistic, the big majority, I'm sure they will say no. Right now. So the nationalistic approach, the nationalistic feeling is not growing. What is growing is the perception that on the current situation, there is no way out. So we need to change. We need simply to evolve, to start a new, let's say, field, game field, in order to have politics in another dimension. That's a bit different to the Basque Country, if you want. I mean, that's a bit different. I'm not saying it's worse or better. It's simply different. It's a completely different reality and completely different situation. Probably the other difference as well with the Basque Country is the number. The population is the number of people who is asking for this as well. The Basque Country is more than Catalonia as well, if you want, and probably this would explain a bit how the Spanish government is a bit more afraid of the Catalan reality that it was from the Basque Country, but this is a bit different. But definitely, the perception I have from the European approach is that during a lot of time, the Basque Country was part of the agenda. Scotland was part of the agenda. Somehow, I mean, you could have other realities that were, well, Flanders was a big part of the agenda. I mean, the Belgian reality was a big part of the agenda. Catalonia was never part of the agenda. And that would surprise many of the consigliaries. Until 2012. That's the key issue. The difference is that you have 1.5 million of people in the streets that have mobilized themselves without the implication of the political parties and the president himself. That makes a difference. Since that moment, the Catalan dossier becomes part of the worries of the European Union member states, auxiliaries, or if you want the institutions themselves. What is going to come out from this? Never know. But what is clear there is that it's a singular reality that deserves to be studied on its own, because the idiosyncrasy of this is not comparable with the Basque Country or the Flanders or even Scotland. I mean, the reality is completely different in some aspects. There are some commonality, there are some common aspects if you want, but broadly speaking, it has a very singular, its own, let's say, trend that needs to be studied and evaluated on its own.
Thank you. I believe there are some questions over here. Okay, maybe we will take this group of 3 questions and then have some final comments from the panel. So if you could note them as we go along. Yes, please.
All right, I have some questions for our regarding NATO and possible a new Catalonian state, a small state, would it join NATO? Has such a question been a part of the discussion in Catalonia, and how is it very split between parties?
Good question. And the next one?
Hello, my name is Sigurd Björk. I wanted to ask about the language. I believe there's 11 million people speaking Catalonian, more or less.
Sorry, I don't hear you. Sorry.
How many people are in Catalonia?
No.
And I didn't hear.
No, can you hear me now?
A bit better, a bit better. Better.
About the language, I believe there is more people speaking Catalonian than the 7.5 million you mentioned before. And the role of writers writing in Catalonia now, are they active in the campaign only by writing in Catalonian, or are they actively writing about the issues of independence? And then, in the case of a yes, how would you foresee the fate of Spanish within the Catalonian language field? What would happen to Spanish when it becomes a secondary language, like officially? Thank you.
With the Spanish within Catalonia, you mean? With the Spanish language within Catalonia.
Shall we take the third one here too?
The last question, the third question, or comment?
Just a comment to complement Professors Romeva and Abad on the difference between Catalonia and the Basque Country. It may be obvious, but I think we have to recall it. There is no problem of violence in Catalonia. In the Basque Country for 40 years, violent conflict has has created a huge problem with almost 1,000 people dead in these 40 years. Nothing like this has happened in Catalonia. I really think that we have to stress it. This is a completely peaceful movement what we are living right now in Catalonia. And just to answer the question on NATO, I would just remind what the president of the Catalan government has repeated, which is that Catalonia, an independent Catalonia, would honor all the precedent commitments, all the commitments made by the president state in terms of economy and security. What it means in the end, we'll see what it means. It will depend on negotiations and also on the consensus in Catalonia, but we will honor the commitments made by the president state, it means by Spain.
Okay, now we have just 10 minutes, so if our two panel members from Catalonia can give fairly quick comments on that, it will be a chance also then for me to ask the three Icelandic members for very quick closing remarks. So please carry on.
Yes, well, about the NATO, I think is already answered, so nothing more to say. About the rights in Catalonia, and about the Spanish language status in Catalonia. There is actually it was 3-4 days ago, a association of Catalan writers with more than hundreds of writers supporting the right to decide of our future, of our political future, which shows that there is also support of these writers. And about the Spanish status on Catalonia, I wrote a paper which is in the King's College. I can send it to you later, dealing with this topic. It is not an easy topic, but we need to, first of all, I think it's to preoccupy very much nowadays. We will respect, of course, all the human rights related with languages. And if we decide to have an official language in our constitution, which is something that we need to discuss when we are drafting the constitution, I'm completely sure that Spanish will have protection and we will have a special status in Catalonia.
Very short on this. I will make a more, let's say, political statement on this in both issues. To me, one of the important outcomes of everything that is happening right now is that it gives us the opportunity of reinventing ourselves, also in a democratic way. And that means that, for instance, we are in Iceland. I know that the constitution here is a bit now in a difficult situation, but we have been very attentive on how all the process of drafting this constitution has been dealt so far. And that's important also in terms of trying to learn on how in the 21st century constitutions need to be drafted, on what is today in 21st century the concept of democracy, on how the main principles of how these, let's say, frames, legal frames, needs to be established. This has to do with NATO. I mean, it has to be a debate on what the new Catalan state, whenever this happens or if this happens, will have to be part of any institutions. And this is not easy to say right now because it will have to be obvious, something that has to be discussed in different levels. So far, it's true. I mean, there is, legally speaking, there is direct consequences. But for some of us, this is a very good opportunity to simply improve. Should we part of NATO or not? I mean, and if not, in which sense? in that sense, I will tell you as well something. There's a strong conviction that a new Catalan state doesn't need to have an army. Well, as Iceland is now demonstrated it is possible to have. So in that sense, it's important that we simply see this as part of the future discussions that the social society is going to discuss in the future. And on the language, there is between 9 and 10 million of people speaking language. It's a very huge language community in the world. One of the biggest mistakes that the Spanish government, not only the Partido Popular, but also socialists, had made in the past, has been denying the fact that the Catalan was also a Spanish state language, and to defend that language in the institutional institutions, in the international, and French as well, in the international institutions. Why? Simply because they showed that actually the Catalan was a second level state language. I think that in the new Catalonian state, this should not happen. Spanish is a language in Catalonia. It's a common language in Catalonia. It's a normal language in Catalonia. And there is no reason why a new Catalan state should impede the right of normalizing Spanish as a normal language. Still, this will have to be discussed in the frame of the new constitution and in the frame of the new legal frame that we have. The difference would be that if you have two official languages, both will have the same rights and the same status at the international level, which is not the case that we have now in the Spanish reality, where you have one international recognized languages and three other languages that are like a kind of, let's say, well, secondary or vernacular language. This has been, to me, one of the main mistakes of the Spanish government historically, and which has brought us to the situation we are now confronted with now.
Thank you. Then for our three Icelandic members, a couple of minutes each, if you'd like to use them to give some final thoughts. Baldur, do you have anything to add?
Maybe just 2 points. First, just to say that it's extremely interesting that the leaders of the independent movements in both Scotland and Catalonia campaign for, I want to continue to be within the European Union and NATO. At the same time, that's the second point, it's in a way interesting how negatively the EU leaders have responded to the quest of independence within these regions. And I almost like in a way to ask you, I'm not sure if Alison allows that. But I thought it was extremely interesting. You said that you thought that EU membership could prevent the Spanish government from using its military force against Catalonia. At the same time, are you not disappointed in how the EU leadership has handled the request in Catalonia and Scotland about independence? Sorry, Alison.
Yes and yes. Yes and yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes and yes. Don't forget that the Article 8 of the Spanish Constitution allows the army to intervene to safeguard the Spanish national integrity and unity. So, constitutionally speaking, in the question of legitimacy, the army will be legitimate to intervene. So, to be honest with you, I think that the European Union, as Raúl said, because he knows better than I the real politic within the European Union, I think it has been a strong argument to stop any ideas to implement this article, to enforce this article within the Spanish reality. But even more, in 1931 and in 1934, we have a very similar experience, and our president was imprisoned and then was shot and killed. We're talking about 70 years ago. We have been trying to reform and to amend Spain 300 years, for 300 years. So now, what makes a big difference in the picture, in the scenario, I think, is the EU. What we expect is more involvement. What we expect is that the EU will be more active in defense of the democratic inputs and claims that us, EU citizens, are we demanding, are we requiring. You're right. But on the other hand, I think it has been a counterforce that has taken out of the picture the possibility of an army invasion or intervention in Catalonia.
It certainly makes, sorry.
Very short, well, go ahead.
if you look at the way that the European Union restrained British behaviour in Northern Ireland,
Right.
I think what you're saying is quite realistic, because there is the possibility of appeal to the European courts if excess violence is used. I just want to say one other thing, and I'm sorry because I know time is short, but we must be really careful if we talk about European leadership or Europe opposing independence. All we have is a couple of statements by individuals, most of whom have very clear individual reasons to be against it and felt strongly enough to speak. No lawyer in Brussels has ever been mandated to look at the possibilities here. And that's partly because if European lawyers did look at this, they would find many easy ways to let such new states come in. I do think it's important to say that before we blow up this angle too much. Raoul, I will let you speak. I assume we can go on for about 5 minutes extra. So if you wish to add anything on that, but very briefly.
Very short. I was going to say this, okay? There are two things on reading what the European Union is doing. One, there is no single statement at any level that denies the fact that Catalonia can vote.
Exactly.
No single statement. What they are interpretations of what would be the consequences if it's, well, according to the result or the outcome of that vote, would it be a positive one? In that case, they are, of course, positioned saying that, well, this is going to be a very difficult situation for Catalonia. Some others say that, well, we will be adapt as we would have done if Scotland would have voted yes. So then you have different interpretations. But no one is denying the fact that Catalonia can vote. The only one in Europe who is saying that this cannot be done is the Spanish government, no anyone else. And that's important to be recalled. Second one, my experience is that Europe is a very pragmatic project, a very pragmatic one, which means that, first, the fact that legally what we ask to do is not formally banned in the European Union treaties. It's not formally banned. It's not foreseen. There is no mechanism to establish this, but it's not banned. The fact that it's not banned allows the European Union simply to react on this. If you read what happened in Scotland, I insist once again, they were not happy because that's uncomfortable, but they understood that it was an agreement between the UK and Scotland, and they would have adapted too. Well, the same is going to happen in Catalonia. The same thing. Which means that actually, at the end, when you say, are you frustrated? Yeah, of course, you always would like to have a very more strong, more explicit support on this. Absolutely agree. But I can tell you as well that for the Spanish government is a real defeat. So far, not having the statement from anyone in the European Union giving them the word or saying that they are right when they tell us you cannot vote. They have tried. And I can tell you, and I'm not sure because I'm not trying, but I mean, I can firmly affirm that they have tried to get from the European Union such a statement. They did not succeed. That's a failure from the Spanish government on that field.
Okay. Valor, you've been very patient. What are your closing reflections?
I just want to say that that's been very interesting to hear the views of Catalan panelists about the situation in Catalonia. And what I found also interesting is kind of that there is a tie, this is not, there's a historical tie here, and you mentioned this is also a part of a transitional justice process, this emphasis on democracy, kind of, that's very much part of the discourse, which I found interesting, that you're using that. And also, yeah, this has links with the past. I think also what has been fruitful coming out here is kind of the key role of the EU. It's going to be very, I think, and I was wondering whether the EU would at some point be brought in as a kind of a mediator, because the Spanish state seems to be so adamant on preventing anything happening in Catalonia. And so this is going to be potentially very dangerous. So I just hope that things will not go out of hand, and because it's going to be very difficult for the Spanish state to prevent the holding of a referendum I mean,
It's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're not going to use the army to stop the referendum. I mean, it's going to be
Forever
Europe. But it's going to be. But I also think that you should not underestimate the possibility within the EU to work against the project of state building and state formation. That's going to be. I mean, member states can do a lot to do so.
Well, thank you very much, and Gudmundur, you will now have the last word.
Yeah, first of all, we have to remember that even Catalonia would be a small state. It wouldn't be that small. I mean, there are many smaller states in the European Union than Catalonia would be. Secondly, I would like to, I mean, it's clear that the international community, we can, kind of personalize the international community, like status quo. I mean, especially status quo is quiet and peaceful. So any change is usually rather resented. But it would be accepted. I mean, it's also pragmatic. I mean, if this development would happen, I mean, it would happen and it would be accepted. The third point is one of the reasons why status quo is kind of preferred is there are all kinds of implications that come with a statehood for Catalonia. I mean, there are many other cases that could take Catalonia as an example. I mean, you could only look at Ukraine and other that kind of places, which are very different, of course, but could be kind of maintained that there is this kind of connection. But in the end, we have been discussing the European Union and the European Union's attitude towards Catalonia. And you have to remember that the European Union is not an entity. I mean, it is a collection of states. And it is clear that there has been one state in the European Union that has been adamant against any attempts of these kind of small nations to get into the European Union, that is Spain. I mean, it is clear when the Scots were discussing this, it was clear that there was one state in the European Union that said, no, Scotland is not going to enter easily, and it was Spain, and the reason why was very obvious. So in a sense, I mean, what happens will happen. And if there will be a peaceful development, which we, of course, we hope, I mean, we could look at Iceland and Denmark as a paradigm. It is difficult, but because any example is a particular in a sense. But it's clear that in the negotiations between Denmark and Iceland regarding the independence of Iceland, it is clear that Denmark never resented that in any way. This was a peaceful and legal process, which had most to do with the questions if Iceland could stand on its feet or not. And when Iceland believed it could, they were let loose. It is clear also that Catalonia means much more for Spain in general than Iceland meant for Denmark, both in economic and political terms. So I think that is the one reason why Spain is stalling. I mean, Catalonia is a big piece of Spain. It's a rather important piece of Spain. And it is very much understandable that the Spanish government is not extremely happy of let Catalonia go. But my perception is that if the people of Catalonia want to go, I mean, in the end they will. I mean, that's how history teaches us. And it can be tomorrow, and probably not tomorrow, but it will be in the end.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's a very suitable way to end, bringing us back to the bigger historical perspective and also where Iceland fits into this whole issue. I hope it's a good enough demonstration of why you should have come to Iceland. Thank you very much for doing that. It's certainly been extremely useful for us, a tremendous learning experience, and of course a very exciting topic. There is no way to deny that. I hope those watching the streamed version have also found this exciting and interesting. And I think we now have a duty to thank very warmly all the speakers on this occasion and all the organisers of this event and the Nordic House. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.